This morning, I walked across Oslo to the new Norwegian government quarters, which was rebuilt after the Breivik terrorist attack 15 years ago. And I sat in a briefing room with foreign correspondents from Reuters and Financial Times and a dozen countries from all over the world, because the Norwegian Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, was giving his annual briefing for the Foreign Press Association. So I want to share with you what a careful, experienced European statesman said in that room this morning and why I think it matters for those readers and those listeners who are watching the world from a bit more of a distance. And for my American readers who are used to their president making headlines every single day, the contrast with Støre couldn't be greater. He's a well-educated, soft-spoken, former foreign minister with some 7 years in that role. He's a man who chooses his words carefully after spending decades in rooms where he knows that words have consequences. And this morning, he never once mentioned Trump's name. He did not really need to. Everything he said was shaped by the new reality without ever stating that directly. And the first thing that he was very clear about: America remains Norway's most important ally, especially in the Arctic. And he said that plainly. And what he described next is not a turn away from America. It is what serious countries do when uncertainty increases. They build redundancy. And Norway has now signed a comprehensive defense agreement with France, the Narvik Agreement, and has joined similar agreements already with Britain and Germany. And these are three of Europe's largest military powers. Støre said that Europe has to take more of the bill and also more of the responsibility for its own security. And those are his words. He said them calmly, without drama, and that is how Europeans talk when they're describing a fundamental shift. He talked about a nuclear conversation that 8 European countries, including Norway and including Netherlands, by the way, are having with France about French nuclear deterrence. And he was very careful. This is not some kind of nuclear umbrella. Norway will have no nuclear weapons on its soil. Norway's commitment to arms control is unchanged. And what is happening is a conversation. And just the simple fact that this conversation is happening at all, that tells you something about where Europe is. And on Russia, he said that Europe cannot live with a war on its own territory and no political contact with Moscow. Someone in Europe needs to be talking to Russia and not leaving it to others in other continents to manage Europe's problems. Norway has a land border with Russia, and Norway knows that geography is permanent. And on Greenland, he was asked about Trump's threats to the island, and Store's reply stayed well within the NATO framework. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, which is part of NATO, and NATO is relevant to all NATO territory. And then he reminded us that the law of the sea applies in the Arctic. And some countries deal with the Arctic as though normal rules do not apply there. But they do apply. Coastal states have rights and obligations, and he did not name anyone. Again, he did not need to. And then there was the one moment where he spoke about Utøya. Norway marks 15 years since the Breivik attacks this summer, and he killed 69 young people at Utøya youth camp. And Støre mentioned that 5 of his current cabinet ministers are survivors of that massacre. They survived an attack by a far-right extremist who wanted to destroy the Norwegian left. And they went on to become government ministers. They won, Støre said. They have the upper hand and democracy will be strong. In the Planet newsletter, I've written about how democracies often prove their resilience at the moments that they face the most pressure. And this is one of those stories. With all the grief of that day, the 5 ministers around Store's cabinet table are also a story about what democratic strength actually looks like. And I thought about that on the way home, because this week I wrote about 10 ICE detainees who died by suicide in US custody, and I wrote about asylum seekers imprisoned in some hotel in Equatorial Guinea. And democracy does not always win, but sometimes it does. And sometimes the people who were supposed to be silenced end up running the country. And one more thing before I go. As I was just finishing preparing this talk, there was breaking news. A federal judge in Washington ruled that President Trump's name was illegally added to the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. And he wrote that the law establishing the center made crystal clear that only Congress could change it. And the judge also temporarily blocked the Kennedy Center from closing this summer, as Mr. Trump had demanded. Democracy does not always win, but sometimes it does. Thank you for being here. Please like, share, and especially subscribe, because your support makes my newsletter and also these videos possible. I wish you all a great weekend, and I'll be back here soon.